If it is wrong to use force, then no government can exist, okay? Because in a libertarian government, the government has the right to protect life, liberty, and property. The problem with this is that you're going to use force to defend those things, to tax people to support a military. If you're going to use the moral argument, then you're going to have to take it to its logical ends. And the logical ends is anarcho-capitalism. So Ayn Rand does say it is wrong to use force, and force is only okay in defending yourself, never as an initiation. However, she's not an anarcho-capitalist. She herself contradicts herself.
Now, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people use this argument that Rand's philosophy is internally inconsistent because she's in favor of government, and that, you know, following her metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics to its logical conclusion, there could be no government because governments collect taxes, and they collect taxes using coercive physical force, which means they violate the non-aggression principle, and therefore her philosophy is internally inconsistent because she supports government, which is inherently, you know, inherently coercive. This argument comes out of an article by Roy A. Childs, Jr., an article which incidentally he recanted on later in life. But it was published in 1969, and it keeps on popping its head up every time someone thinks they've rediscovered a flaw in Rand's philosophy. It just keeps on going around and around and around like a bad flu. The essential problem with that argument is that it focuses on the action of using force. Rand, in talking about government, didn't say that the purpose of government is to, you know, have a monopoly on the use of force. That's not the purpose of government. Here's what she did say was the purpose of government. A government is the means of placing the retaliatory use of force under objective control, i.e., under objectively defined laws. That was from The Nature of Government in the book The Virtue of Selfishness. Now, objective laws. The purpose of government is to put force under the control of objective laws. If there were no government, there would be no single system of laws. So what's the problem with that? Well, here's what Rand says about that. It is a grave error to suppose that a dictatorship rules a nation by means of strict, rigid laws which are obeyed and enforced with rigorous military precision. Such a rule would be evil, but almost bearable. Men could endure the harshest edicts, provided these edicts were known, specific, and stable. It is not the known that breaks men's spirits, but the unpredictable. A dictatorship has to be capricious. It has to rule by means of the unexpected, the incomprehensible, the wantonly irrational. It has to deal not in death, but in sudden death. A state of chronic uncertainty is what men are psychologically unable to bear. In the same article she wrote, the threat of sudden destruction, of unpredictable retaliation for unnamed offenses, is a much more potent means of enslavement than explicit dictatorial laws. It demands more than mere obedience. It leaves men no policy save one, to please the authorities, to please blindly, uncritically, without standards or principles, to please in any issue, matter, or circumstance, for fear of an unknowable, unprovable vengeance. When men are caught in the trap of non-objective law, when their work, future, and livelihood are at the mercy of a bureaucrat's whim, when they have no way of knowing what unknown, quote, influence, unquote, will crack down on them for which unspecified offense, fear becomes their basic motive, if they remain in the industry at all, and compromise, conformity, staleness, dullness, the dismal grayness of the middle of the road are all that can be expected of them. Independent thinking does not submit to bureaucratic edicts, originality does not follow public policies, integrity does not petition for a license, heroism is not fostered by fear, creative genius is not summoned forth at the point of a gun. Non-objective law is the most effective weapon of human enslavement. Its victims become its enforcers and enslave themselves. So that's non-objective law. She's referring there still to a government with a system of laws that is not objective. But with anarchism, you don't have a government at all. You don't have a system of laws. You don't even have non-objective laws. Even a society whose every member was fully rational and faultlessly moral could not function in a state of anarchy. It is the need of objective laws and of an arbiter for honest disagreements among men that necessitates the establishment of a government. It's not the need for a monopoly on force that necessitates a government. It's the need for objective laws. Rand is saying that without objective laws, which is exactly what would happen in an anarchistic society, there would be a lack of objective laws because there would be a lack of law, period. There wouldn't be a legal system. There might be numerous alleged legal systems, alleged by different people or different guns for hire. But there would not be a single legislature creating a single body of law. Where there's no government, there is no objective law. Where there's no objective law, there is chronic fear, chronic uncertainty. There is that lack of motivation to be happy. There's only the desire constantly to please the authorities, whoever they might be, whether they're privately funded or publicly funded, whatever. The point is, without objective law, chronic fear is the state of society. That's why she also says in The Nature of Government, peaceful coexistence is impossible if a man has to live under the constant threat of force to be unleashed against him by any of his neighbors at any moment. Whether his neighbors' intentions are good or bad, whether their judgment is rational or irrational, whether they are motivated by a sense of justice or by ignorance, or by prejudice or by malice. The use of force against one man cannot be left to the arbitrary decision of another. Again, she's saying you have to have an objective set of laws. And you can't have an objective set of laws without a person, an entity that's making those laws. That entity is government. That entity is someone who's common to all of the governed, common to everyone who's subject to those laws. And if you had competing police forces, that's not a substitute for objective law. You're only dealing with the enforcement part, but you haven't dealt with the law yet. Where's the law coming from that's objective? Where's that single source of law that's common to all, that makes law and living predictable? It's not there in a society without a government. Now let's relate this back to the idea that Rand's philosophy is internally consistent. Poppycock. If you follow it through, Rand's saying that a person must be true to the facts of reality. They must recognize, acknowledge, and govern their lives in accordance with them. They must acknowledge those laws, those facts of reality, by using their rational faculty. They should govern their every action rationally and pursue values, things that are objectively of value to their life, in the pursuit of their own personal happiness. Now, you cannot do that if there is a lack of objective law. With the lack of objective law, she's saying you can't pursue your own happiness. You're in a state of constant fear. There's no hope because there's not a control, an objective control of the use of coercive physical force. There's not even an attempt to put force under objective control in an anarchistic society. There can't be one because there is no single body of law that all of these privately funded police forces or security agencies or whatever you want to call them are obeying. And again, just like almost any argument I've ever seen on YouTube or anywhere else concerning anarchism, monopolies, coercive physical force held by government, etc., they almost never address the issue of objective law. Now, Roy A. Childs did address it, but only in the most laughable way. His article was called Objectivism and the State, an open letter to Ayn Rand. Roy Childs says, the answer to this problem of objective laws is quite easy. All that would be forbidden in any voluntary society would be the initiation of physical force or the gaining of a value by any substitute thereof, such as fraud. If a person chooses to initiate force in order to gain a value, then by his act of aggression he creates a debt which he must repay to the victim plus damages. There is nothing particularly difficult about this, and no reason why the free market could not evolve institutions around this concept of justice. Well, okay, first blush. Effectively what he's saying is that we don't need laws. All we need is this non-aggression principle. That's literally what he's just said. It's that easy, he says. You don't need lawyers, you don't need highfalutin judges with lots of study in the law, you don't need all these principles of evidence and etc. All you need is a non-aggression principle. And then, if it's violated, well then we just trounce that guy. We take his money, we make him pay damages. Well, the problem with that is that the non-aggression principle, as presented by anarchists, as presented by libertarians, etc., is completely vague and ambiguous. Why? Because they say it's axiomatic. What's coercion? Well, it really depends on your metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, doesn't it? What if you're an Islamic who believes in liberty, but you don't think it's coercion to force a woman to wear a hijab because God said that that's part of living a life of liberty? I'm not saying that that's what Islam says, but why couldn't it say that? It's religion. It could say anything. There might be any number of religions that someone contrives, which are supposedly or in name in favor of liberty, in some definition. And there might be any number of things that are also considered part of liberty, that other people might think aren't part of liberty. But since we're not going to get into the job of judging ethics, judging epistemology, judging metaphysics, because we're just going to present axiomatically this non-aggression principle, as though it's a given that everyone can agree on and unambiguously interpret, which of course they can't. Can you see the problem here? There is any number of ways that the non-aggression principle can be interpreted if it is presented as a floating principle, in fact an axiom. What's coercion? What's force? Ask a socialist and a capitalist those questions, you're going to get different answers. They all might think that they love liberty. How many civil libertarians are communists? Think about this. It's not just as easy as having a floating non-aggression principle and just saying, well, that's how we'll know when to use force or not. That's how these privately funded police will enforce the law. If they think the non-aggression principle has been violated, well then, boy oh boy, they're going to go in there guns a-blazing. So effectively, Roy Childs, and impliedly everybody who takes his view, is saying that, well, law is just, it's overrated. All you really need is this simple principle. Now the second thing that's kind of laughable about this is this idea that, well, these private police forces would evolve an objective law. Look, how could numerous different police forces evolve to have the exact same set of laws? We don't even have the same laws in two provinces in Canada. Never mind, or in two cities side by side the laws will be different. Why would two police forces in the same geographic area have the exact same set of laws? They wouldn't. You can't have a given geographic area governed by multiple police forces, each having their own evolved, self-evolved, self-created laws that they're following. It's the fact that there's only one guiding mind, i.e. one legislature, that makes it possible for there to be one set of laws. And it's only when there is one set of laws that that set can be objective. If there's two sets of laws, then almost by definition, they can't be objective. If they conflict in any way, it can't be the case that man is living under an objective set of laws. Now just imagine a society without laws, with only this principle. What about laws of evidence? What about laws of procedure? How can you objectively apply objective laws? If A, there's nothing but a principle to guide you, and B, there aren't any laws of evidence. In fact, there's no laws to judge in accordance with the laws of evidence. There's just this principle. You need to have laws, not only substantive laws, but procedural laws, laws of evidence, etc. And they too have to be objective. It's not just as simple as saying, hey, we got a principle, now we all know how to govern ourselves. It's a silly and very naive concept. And I trust that Roy Childs wasn't a lawyer, because I can't imagine any lawyer, or anybody trained in the law at all, thinking that it's at all workable to just have a principle in lieu of law. Never mind even objective or non-objective, just law at all. Nor can I imagine anybody saying that law can evolve on a company-by-company basis. That's not law. That might be company policy, but that's not law. Law, by definition, is accompanied by a jurisdiction over a geographic area. And you can't have multiple overlapping jurisdictions, each having their own set of laws, and that is exactly what's implied when you have choice in policing within a given jurisdiction, within a given geographic area. You have multiple systems of laws at different stages of evolution, presumably, because companies aren't all the same age and they don't all mature at the same rate and they don't all have the same philosophy. Some are mystical and some are utilitarian and some are moral relativists. And the idea that if you just get, I mean, just imagine that tomorrow you woke up and there were no more police officers, legislators, no government at all. What do you think would happen? Do you think that all of a sudden police forces would prop up and develop these objective codes of law and that everyone would just be living in peace? That's absolutely naive. One need go no further than turning off the power in any city to see what happens when people, in effect, don't have a government anymore. They take advantage. That's exactly what they would do. And people who own stores do what store owners should do. When someone comes crashing in the front window to grab their TV, they take out the gun and they shoot. But that's not the application of law to the restoration of justice. That's just defense. And defense is different than using force in a retaliatory way after the fact, after you've been wronged. That requires an evaluation of the evidence, an objective evaluation of the evidence, in accordance with laws of evidence, in accordance with objective laws of procedure, and in accordance with objective laws concerning what is right and what is wrong. What kind of remedy should result from what kind of wrong. All of these things have to be specified in law if anyone is to understand what is expected of them, if they're not to live in fear, as Rand said. A principle alone, in the absence of objective laws, is not something that will stand in lieu of laws for the purposes of preventing people from living in a constant state of fear, wondering who at any given point might think that their rights are being violated, might call on their private police force to come and arrest you, take your property, make you pay damages, what have you. It's a completely naive notion. And it's not only a completely naive notion, it's not consistent with Rand's philosophy. It's not a logical extension of her philosophy. It's a negation of reason. It's a negation of objectivity. And it's certainly not the case that Rand, in rejecting anarchism and supporting the idea that you have to have objective laws, hence, as an implication, you have to have a government, was in any way being internally inconsistent with her philosophy. Quite the contrary.